Tonight, we're diving deep into the unsettling theories, the disturbing episodes, and the hidden darkness that's been there all along. So get comfortable, because we're about to explore 2 hours of SpongeBob lore that'll make you see this childhood show in a completely different light.
Let's start with something that sounds innocent at first. SpongeBob works at the Krusty Krab, flipping burgers for minimum wage, living his best life in his pineapple house. But have you ever stopped to think about what those Krabby Patties are actually made of? Mr. Krabs guards that secret formula like his life depends on it. He's obsessed with it, paranoid about it. And when you really think about it, what kind of meat would be available in an underwater world full of sea creatures? Here's where it gets dark. There's a theory that's been floating around for years that suggests the Krabby Patty's secret ingredient is actually crab meat. Think about it. Mr. Krabs is a crab. He's the only crab we regularly see in Bikini Bottom. His daughter Pearl is a whale, not a crab. Whereas Mrs. Krabs, she's never mentioned, never shown. It's like she doesn't exist. What if the reason Mr. Krabs is so secretive about the formula isn't just about protecting his business? What if he's hiding something much more sinister? The theory goes that Mr. Krabs discovered he could use crab meat to create the perfect burger. And where would he get that crab meat? From other crabs, maybe even from his own species. It explains why he's so paranoid about anyone finding out. It explains why he's willing to do absolutely anything to protect that formula. Because if the truth got out, he wouldn't just lose his business. He'd be exposed as someone who's basically committing cannibalism for profit. And if you think about Mr. Krabs' character, it actually makes a twisted kind of sense. This is a guy who sold SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents. A guy who almost drove Plankton to death just to protect his secret. A guy who values money more than anything else in the world. Would he really draw the line at using crab meat if it made him rich? The show even drops hints. In one episode, Mr. Krabs says the Krabby Patty is made with love and a secret ingredient. What if that love is just his love for money, and the secret ingredient is too horrible to ever reveal? But the darkness around the Krusty Krab doesn't stop there. Let's talk about SpongeBob himself. This guy works full-time, sometimes overtime, sometimes even 24-hour shifts, and he's been working there for years. He's the best fry cook Mr. Krabs has ever had. He's dedicated, talented, and completely loyal. And yet, he still makes minimum wage. He's never gotten a raise, never gotten a promotion. Mr. Krabs exploits his love for the job to keep him working for basically nothing. Think about how messed up that is. SpongeBob generates massive profits for the Krusty Krab. He's the reason the restaurant is always packed. He's the reason they have such a good reputation. And Mr. Krabs pays him so little that SpongeBob can barely afford to live. His house is a pineapple that just fell into the ocean. He eats the same thing every day. He can't afford a boat that works properly. His entire life revolves around a job that doesn't value him at all. And here's the really dark part. SpongeBob doesn't even realize he's being exploited. He's so innocent, so optimistic, that he actually believes working at the Krusty Krab is the greatest opportunity in the world. He frames his first dollar earned. He celebrates his work anniversaries. He dreams about making Krabby Patties. Mr. Krabs has basically brainwashed him into loving a job that takes advantage of him every single day. It's psychological manipulation disguised as a happy workplace. Now let's talk about Squidward, because his situation might be even more depressing. Squidward is a talented artist. He plays the clarinet. He creates sculptures. He paints. He has genuine passion and skill for the arts. And yet, he's stuck working as a cashier at a fast food restaurant, making minimum wage just like SpongeBob. But unlike SpongeBob, Squidward knows exactly how miserable his life is. He knows he's wasting his potential. He knows he deserves better. And he can't escape. Think about how many episodes show Squidward trying to pursue his dreams only to have them crushed. He auditions for orchestras and gets rejected. He enters art competitions and loses. He tries to find better jobs and fails. Every single time he reaches for something more, the universe slaps him back down into his miserable existence. And the worst part is that everyone around him, especially Spongebob, makes his life even more unbearable. His only two neighbors are the exact people who drive him crazy. He can't even have peace in his own home. There's a theory that Squidward represents what happens when you give up on your dreams, but you're not quite dead inside yet. He's trapped in that horrible middle ground where he remembers what he wanted to be, but he's accepted that it'll never happen. Every day is a reminder of his failure. Every shift at the Krusty Krab is another nail in the coffin of his artistic ambitions. And the show plays this for comedy, but when you really think about it, Squidward's life is a tragedy. He's slowly dying inside, and nobody cares. Let's move on to Patrick, because his character might be the darkest of all when you look beneath the surface. Patrick is SpongeBob's best friend. He's lovable, he's funny, he's stupid in an endearing way. But have you ever noticed that Patrick has absolutely no purpose in life? He doesn't work, he doesn't contribute to society, he just lives under a rock, doing nothing, day after day. And the show treats this like it's completely normal. But here's the disturbing part. Patrick isn't just lazy, he's shown to be incredibly selfish, manipulative, and even cruel when he wants to be. There are episodes where Patrick deliberately hurts SpongeBob's feelings or sabotages his happiness, just because he's bored or jealous. There are episodes where Patrick's stupidity causes genuine harm to others, and he doesn't care. He's like a child with no sense of consequences, no empathy, and no growth. The theory here is that Patrick represents arrested development taken to its extreme. He never had to mature. He never faced consequences for his actions. He's enabled by everyone around him, especially SpongeBob, who treats him like a friend no matter how badly Patrick behaves. And because Patrick never experiences real hardship or responsibility, he never learns. He stays in this perpetual state of ignorant selfishness, dragging everyone else down with him. And if you think about it, Patrick's existence raises some really dark questions. How does he survive? He doesn't work, so he has no money. How does he afford food? Where does his rock come from? Is he on some kind of government assistance? Is Bikini Bottom just supporting him while he contributes nothing? Or worse, is Patrick actually aware of how the world works, but he's chosen to be a parasite, living off others while pretending to be too stupid to know better? Now let's talk about Sandy. She's a squirrel who lives underwater in a bubble. She's a scientist, an inventor, an athlete. She's basically perfect at everything she does. But here's what's weird. Why is she there? The show tells us she's there for research. But what kind of research? Who's funding her? What's her actual purpose in Bikini Bottom? There's a theory that Sandy is actually conducting experiments on the residents of Bikini Bottom without their knowledge. Think about how many times she's created dangerous inventions that go wrong and threaten everyone. Think about how many times she's tested technology on SpongeBob and Patrick, using them as guinea pigs. She's a scientist with unlimited resources and no oversight. What if her real mission is to study how these sea creatures behave, react, and adapt to different situations? This would explain why she's so friendly with everyone despite being a completely different species. She needs their trust to observe them properly. It would explain why she keeps creating inventions that seem designed to cause chaos. She's not trying to help, she's experimenting. And everyone in Bikini Bottom is just part of her research project, completely unaware that they're being studied like lab rats. And if you think about the kinds of inventions Sandy creates, they're often really dangerous. She built a teleporter that fused SpongeBob and Squidward together. She created a submarine that nearly destroyed the town. She's made weapons, dangerous chemicals, and unstable technology. What kind of scientist does that, unless they're testing something specific? What if Sandy's real employer is some shadowy organization that wants to understand sea life for darker purposes? Let's shift gears and talk about Plankton, because his story is actually one of the most tragic in the entire show. Plankton is the villain. He's always trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula. He's always scheming, always failing, always getting crushed, literally and figuratively. But why? What drives him to this obsessive behavior? The show gives us hints throughout the years. Plankton and Mr. Krabs used to be friends. They created the original burger together, but something happened that drove them apart, and now Plankton has dedicated his entire life to getting revenge by stealing the formula. Think about how sad that is. Plankton's whole existence revolves around this one goal. He's married to a computer who barely tolerates him. His restaurant has no customers. He has no friends. He's so small that people literally step on him. His life is an endless cycle of failure and humiliation. But here's where it gets really dark. What if Plankton actually created the original Krabby Patty formula and Mr. Krabs stole it from him? What if everything Plankton has been doing isn't theft at all, but an attempt to take back what's rightfully his? Think about it. Mr. Krabs is greedy, manipulative, and willing to do anything for money. Plankton is intelligent, capable of incredible inventions, and obsessed with one specific goal. What if the real villain of the show has been Mr. Krabs all along? This theory suggests that when Plankton and Mr. Krabs were friends, they worked together on the formula, but when Mr. Krabs saw how profitable it could be, he betrayed Plankton. He took the formula, claimed it as his own, and built his empire on stolen work. Plankton's attempts to steal the formula are actually attempts to reclaim what Mr. Krabs took from him. And Mr. Krabs keeps playing the victim, making everyone believe that Plankton is the bad guy, when really, Krabs is the one who destroyed their friendship and stole his partner's work. This would explain why Plankton is so obsessed. It's not just about money or business. It's about justice. It's about proving that he's not worthless. It's about taking back what was stolen and showing everyone that he was right all along. But because he's small, because he's alone, because he has no power, nobody listens to him. He's been cast as the villain in a story where he might actually be the victim. And if you look at how the show treats Plankton, it's genuinely disturbing. He's constantly physically harmed. He's crushed, stepped on, eaten, exploded, and tortured in ways that would kill anyone else. He's humiliated constantly. His wife insults him. His enemies mock him. Even neutral characters treat him like garbage. And through all of this, Plankton keeps trying. He keeps scheming. Because what else does he have? His entire identity is wrapped up in this one goal. And if he gives up, he has nothing left. Now let's talk about something that's been bothering people for years. Where are all the other fish? I mean, we see citizens of Bikini Bottom, but where are their families? Where are the children, besides the few we see at boating school? Where are the elderly, besides the occasional old fish? The town feels empty, incomplete, like we're only seeing a small portion of the actual population. There's a disturbing theory that Bikini Bottom is actually built on top of a nuclear test site. In real life, Bikini Atoll was used for nuclear weapons testing in the 1940s and 1950s. The show's creator, Steven Hillenburg, confirmed that Bikini Bottom is located beneath Bikini Atoll, so all these characters are living in an area that was irradiated by nuclear explosions. What if the radiation mutated them? Think about it. Spongebob is a sponge who can talk, walk, and think. Patrick is a starfish with human-level intelligence, or at least attempts at it. Squidward is an octopus who plays musical instruments. None of this is natural. These aren't normal sea creatures. They're mutations caused by radiation exposure. And if that's true, then what happened to the normal fish? What happened to the sea life that couldn't adapt to the radiation? The theory suggests that most sea creatures died from the radiation. Only the strongest, or the most mutated, survived. That's why Bikini Bottom's population is so small. That's why we see the same characters over and over. They're the survivors of a nuclear apocalypse, living in the ruins of what used to be a thriving ocean ecosystem. And nobody remembers the old world because they were all born after the bombs fell. They think this is normal because they've never known anything else. This explains so many of the weird things in the show. It explains why there are fires underwater. It explains why characters can drown despite being sea creatures. It explains why the physics make no sense. The radiation has fundamentally changed how their world operates. Reality itself is broken in Bikini Bottom because the nuclear testing corrupted the natural order, and everyone living there is just trying to survive in this twisted, irradiated wasteland, completely unaware of how wrong everything really is. Let's talk about Mrs. Puff, because her situation is way darker than the show lets on. Mrs. Puff is SpongeBob's boating school teacher. She's dedicated her life to education, and SpongeBob has been her student for years, literal years. He's failed his driving test over and over and over again, and each time, Mrs. Puff suffers. She's been injured, traumatized, arrested, and pushed to the edge of sanity because of SpongeBob's inability to drive safely. But here's what's really messed up. Mrs. Puff can't get rid of him. She's tried. There are episodes where she wants to quit, wants to move, wants anything that would get her away from SpongeBob. But she always ends up back in the same situation, teaching the same unteachable student, suffering through the same nightmare over and over. Why can't she escape? The theory is that Mrs. Puff is in witness protection. The show reveals that she's hiding from someone. Her name is Mrs. Puff, but where's Mr. Puff? The show eventually reveals that Mr. Puff was captured and turned into a lamp. That's horrifying on its own. But what if Mrs. Puff witnessed something terrible, something that put her life in danger, and the government relocated her to Bikini Bottom as part of witness protection? This would explain why she can't leave. She's stuck there for her own safety. It would explain why she seems so miserable. She didn't choose this life. She was forced into it. And now she's trapped, teaching a student who might actually be dangerous, who might actually be the reason she ends up hurt or arrested. But she has no choice. If she leaves, whoever's looking for her will find her. So she stays in Bikini Bottom, suffering through SpongeBob's chaos, because the alternative is even worse. And think about how truly dark that is. Mrs. Puff's entire existence is defined by trauma. She lost her husband in a horrific way. She's hiding from unnamed enemies. She's stuck in a dead-end job with a student who unintentionally torments her every single day. She's been to prison because of SpongeBob's actions. She's lost her license, her reputation, and her peace of mind, and she can't escape. She's trapped in a cycle of suffering with no end in sight. That's not comedy, that's psychological horror. Now let's talk about Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail. He seems innocent enough, right? Just a cute pet who meows like a cat. But Gary is different from other pets in the show. Gary is intelligent, really intelligent. He can read. He can understand complex concepts. He solves problems that SpongeBob can't. In many ways, Gary is smarter than his owner. So why does he stay with SpongeBob? There's a theory that Gary is actually SpongeBob's caretaker, not his pet. Think about how many times Gary has saved SpongeBob from disaster. How many times Gary has guided him toward the right decision. How many times Gary has protected him from danger. Gary isn't just a pet, he's a guardian. And he's intelligent enough to know that SpongeBob needs constant supervision. This raises some really disturbing questions. If Gary is that intelligent, why does he pretend to be a simple pet? Is he hiding his true nature on purpose? Is there a reason he needs to stay with SpongeBob specifically? Some theories suggest that Gary is actually a highly advanced being, possibly even an alien, who's observing SpongeBob for unknown purposes. He's disguised as a snail to blend in, but he's actually studying SpongeBob's behavior, maybe reporting back to someone or something beyond Bikini Bottom. Or, in a darker interpretation, Gary knows something about SpongeBob that we don't. Maybe SpongeBob isn't mentally stable. Maybe Gary stays with him because SpongeBob genuinely can't function alone. We know SpongeBob is childlike, naive, and prone to making terrible decisions? What if that's not just his personality? What if SpongeBob actually has some kind of cognitive condition that makes him dependent on Gary's care? Gary meows and acts like a simple pet in public, but in private, he's the one actually keeping SpongeBob alive and functional. Let's shift to something even more unsettling. The Krusty Krab's rival restaurant, the Chum Bucket. It never has customers, ever. Plankton is always alone. The place is constantly empty, and yet it's still operating. How? How does Plankton pay for the building? How does he afford his equipment, his inventions, his supplies? Where does his money come from? The theory here is that Plankton isn't really running a restaurant. The Chum Bucket is a front for something else. Maybe he's actually a drug dealer, selling chum that's laced with addictive substances. Maybe he's running some kind of illegal operation that generates enough money to keep the restaurant open as a cover. Or maybe, and this is even darker, Plankton is actually wealthy, but he's so obsessed with defeating Mr. Krabs that he's chosen to live this miserable existence just to stay close to his enemy. Think about it. Plankton is a genius. He creates robots, lasers, mind control devices, and complex inventions on a regular basis. He could easily patent those inventions and make millions. He could leave Bikini Bottom and become successful somewhere else. But he doesn't. He stays in his failing restaurant, obsessing over the Krabby Patty formula, choosing misery over success. That's not rational behavior. That's mental illness. Plankton is so consumed by his need for revenge that he's destroyed his own life in pursuit of it. And Karen, his computer wife, is stuck watching him spiral. She insults him, mocks him, calls him out on his failures, but she never leaves. Why? Is she programmed to stay? Does she actually care about him despite everything? Or is she trapped in her own way, unable to escape because Plankton created her and she has no choice? Their relationship is deeply dysfunctional. They don't seem to love each other. They barely seem to like each other. And yet, they're together, locked in this toxic cycle of failure and resentment. Let's talk about Pearl, Mr. Krabs' daughter. She's a whale. He's a crab. They're not even the same species. The show never explains this. Where's Pearl's biological mother? Why is Mr. Krabs raising her alone? And why does Pearl seem so different from her father in every way? The popular theory is that Pearl isn't Mr. Krabs' biological daughter. He adopted her, or maybe he's taking care of her for someone else. But here's where it gets dark. What if Mr. Krabs is raising Pearl for purely selfish reasons? What if he's using her as part of some long-term plan? Think about this. Whales eat krill. They eat tiny sea creatures. What if Mr. Krabs is raising Pearl specifically because she could be useful to him? Maybe he's planning to use her size and strength for his business. Maybe he's keeping her around as protection against his enemies. Or maybe, in the darkest interpretation, Mr. Krabs is keeping Pearl close because he knows that when she's fully grown, she'll be incredibly valuable. Whales are massive. They're powerful. They're worth a lot, whether for labor, protection, or worse purposes. And if you look at how Mr. Krabs treats Pearl, there's evidence for this. He's cheap with her. He refuses to spend money on things she wants. He makes her work at the Krusty Krab without proper pay. He controls her life while pretending to be a caring father. But really, he's treating her like an investment. He's putting in the minimum amount of care necessary to keep her around until she's useful to him. That's not love. That's exploitation disguised as family. Now let's discuss one of the most disturbing theories about SpongeBob himself. What if SpongeBob isn't as innocent as he seems? What if he's actually aware of how he affects people, and he does it on purpose? Think about all the times SpongeBob has ruined Squidward's life, destroyed his house, ruined his opportunities, invaded his privacy, caused him physical and emotional harm, and SpongeBob always acts like it's an accident, like he didn't mean to, like he's just being friendly. But there are episodes where SpongeBob's behavior crosses the line from innocent to sociopathic. In SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, SpongeBob essentially tortures a serial killer until the man breaks down mentally. In Squid's Visit, SpongeBob stalks Squidward and recreates his entire house without permission. In dozens of episodes, SpongeBob refuses to respect boundaries, ignores when people say no, and continues his behavior even when it's clearly causing harm. The theory suggests that SpongeBob is actually a manipulative sociopath who uses his cheerful persona to get away with terrible behavior. He knows people see him as innocent, so he can do whatever he wants and face no consequences. He's learned that as long as he smiles and acts naive, people will forgive him for anything, and he uses this to torment Squidward specifically because Squidward sees through the act. Squidward knows SpongeBob is capable of more than he lets on, and that's why SpongeBob targets him so obsessively. If this theory is true, then SpongeBob isn't the hero of the show. He's a villain pretending to be innocent. He's someone who's learned how to manipulate social situations to his advantage, using his appearance and demeanor as weapons. And everyone in Bikini Bottom enables him because they've bought into his act completely. They think he's harmless. They think he means well. But really, SpongeBob is the most dangerous person in town, precisely because nobody suspects him. Let's talk about the Krusty Krab itself. That restaurant is disgusting. The kitchen is filthy. The ingredients are questionable. The health standards are non-existent. Mr. Krabs is so cheap that he'll do anything to save money, including serving rotten food, reusing old ingredients, and ignoring basic safety regulations. And yet, the restaurant is always packed. Customers keep coming back. Why? One theory is that the Krabby Patty contains addictive substances, whether it's MSG, drugs, or some kind of chemical compound. Something in that burger makes people crave it. That's why Plankton wants the formula so badly. It's not just about making a good burger. It's about controlling an addictive product that guarantees customers. And Mr. Krabs knows this. He knows the Krabby Patty is addictive. That's why he guards the formula so carefully. If people found out what's really in it, he'd lose everything. This explains why characters in the show act so crazy about Krabby Patties. They don't just like them, they're obsessed with them. They'll do anything to get one. They'll wait in long lines, pay high prices, and eat them even when they're clearly not fresh. That's not normal behavior. That's addiction. And Mr. Krabs is essentially a drug dealer, using his restaurant as a front to distribute his addictive product to an entire town. And if you think about it, this makes Mr. Krabs one of the most evil characters in fiction. He's not just greedy, he's knowingly addicting people to a substance that can be harmful, all for profit. He's exploiting his employees, manipulating his customers, and destroying his competition through what amounts to chemical warfare. And everyone thinks he's just a businessman. Nobody sees him for what he really is. Now let's discuss the Flying Dutchman. He's a ghost pirate who haunts Bikini Bottom. He's powerful, he's scary, and he seems to exist just to torment the living. But what's his story? Why is he here? What made him into what he is? The Flying Dutchman represents death itself in the world of SpongeBob. He collects souls, he judges the living, he punishes those he deems unworthy. But here's the disturbing part. The Flying Dutchman seems arbitrary in his judgments. He doesn't follow consistent rules. Sometimes he's cruel, sometimes he's helpful, and sometimes he just seems bored. What if death in the SpongeBob universe is random and meaningless? This ties into a larger theory about the show. What if everyone in Bikini Bottom is already dead? What if the nuclear testing didn't just mutate sea creatures, but actually killed them, and now they're all in some kind of purgatory? Think about how nothing in Bikini Bottom makes sense. Fire exists underwater. Characters can drown despite being sea creatures. Buildings defy physics. Time moves inconsistently. What if that's because they're not in the real world anymore? In this theory, Bikini Bottom is the afterlife for sea creatures. They're all dead, killed by the nuclear testing, and now they're stuck in this strange limbo where they repeat the same patterns forever. SpongeBob works at the Krusty Krab every day. Plankton tries to steal the formula every day. Squidward suffers every day. Nothing ever really changes. They're in a loop, reliving their existence without growth, without escape, without end. The Flying Dutchman is the only one who knows the truth. That's why he can freely move between their world and wherever else exists. He's not bound by the rules of Bikini Bottom because he understands what it really is. And sometimes, when he looks at characters like SpongeBob or Squidward, maybe he feels pity because they don't know they're dead. They think this is life. They think they're building towards something. But really, they're just ghosts, going through the motions, unaware that they've already lost everything. Let's shift to something that's bothered fans for years. Bikini Bottom has law enforcement. There are police officers. There's a court system. There are laws. And yet, crime is rampant. Plankton commits crimes constantly and faces minimal consequences. Mr. Krabs breaks labor laws every day. Characters commit assault, theft, destruction of property, and worse, with no real punishment. Why is the justice system so broken? The theory is that Bikini Bottom is a failed state. The government exists, but it's completely ineffective. Police are incompetent or corrupt. The courts are a joke. Laws exist on paper, but aren't enforced. And this didn't happen by accident. Someone benefits from keeping Bikini Bottom dysfunctional. Who benefits? The wealthy. Characters like Mr. Krabs thrive in a system where they can exploit workers, cut corners, and accumulate wealth without consequences. If Bikini Bottom had effective law enforcement, Mr. Krabs would be in prison for labor violations alone. But because the system is broken, he's free to continue his exploitation, and he probably wants to keep it that way. He probably uses his money to ensure that nothing changes. This makes Bikini Bottom a dystopia disguised as a cartoon setting. It's a place where the rich exploit the poor, where justice is meaningless, where the innocent suffer and the guilty prosper. And everyone just accepts it because they don't know any better. They think this is normal. They think this is just how life works. But really, they're living in a broken society that's designed to keep them down, while a small elite profits from their suffering. Let's talk about boating school. SpongeBob has been attending boating school for years. He's failed his driving test hundreds, maybe thousands of times. He's older than most students. He's clearly intelligent enough to understand complex concepts. So why can't he pass a simple driving test? The theory is that SpongeBob has severe anxiety that manifests specifically when he's behind the wheel. He's perfectly capable when he's not thinking about it. There are episodes where he drives perfectly fine when he's not aware he's driving. But the moment he's in a testing situation, his anxiety takes over and he becomes dangerous. This is actually a realistic portrayal of test anxiety and performance anxiety taken to an extreme. But here's where it gets dark. Mrs. Puff knows this. She understands that SpongeBob has a genuine psychological condition, and instead of helping him, instead of referring him to a specialist or finding alternative teaching methods, she just keeps putting him through the same test over and over. She keeps traumatizing him, knowing it won't help, because she's given up. She's so exhausted, so broken by years of failure, that she stopped trying to actually help him. And the school system doesn't care. They keep taking SpongeBob's money. They keep enrolling him in classes. They keep collecting tuition for a service they know they can't provide. It's a scam. They're exploiting SpongeBob's disability for profit, knowing he'll keep coming back because he desperately wants to succeed. And nobody steps in to help him. Nobody suggests therapy or medication or alternative licensing methods. They just let him fail over and over because his failure is profitable. Now let's discuss the Chum Bucket's chum. What is it? Plankton serves chum in his restaurant. It's supposed to be food. But what kind of food? In real life, chum is ground up fish parts used as bait. It's not meant for consumption by intelligent beings. So what is Plankton actually serving? The disturbing theory is that Plankton's chum is made from the citizens of Bikini Bottom, who go missing. Think about it. We never see where Plankton gets his ingredients. We know his restaurant fails because nobody likes the food. But what if the food is disgusting because it's made from something horrible? What if Plankton, in his desperation to compete with Mr. Krabs, has resorted to using the only cheap protein source available to him? Dead fish, missing citizens, bodies. This would explain why the chum bucket never has customers despite being open. Word got out about what's really in the chum. People avoid it not just because it tastes bad, but because they know or suspect what it's made from. And Plankton keeps pretending he's running a legitimate restaurant, but really, he's become a monster. His obsession with defeating Mr. Krabs has driven him to commit atrocities that he justifies in his own mind. And Karen knows. She knows what her husband has become. That's why she's so bitter, so cruel to him. She's stuck with someone who's crossed moral lines that can't be uncrossed. She can't leave because she's a machine, programmed to stay with him. But she can make her disgust known. She can remind him every day of what a failure he is, what a monster he's become, because that's the only revenge she has left. Let's talk about Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. They're elderly superheroes living in a retirement home. They used to be great heroes. They saved people. They fought evil. But now they're old, confused, and largely forgotten. And the show plays their senility for laughs. But when you think about it, their situation is tragic. These men dedicated their lives to protecting others. They risked everything. And now, in their old age, they're abandoned in a retirement home with minimal care. They can barely remember their past victories. They're reduced to caricatures of who they once were. And nobody seems to care. The citizens of Bikini Bottom treat them like joke, like living museum pieces. Spongebob and Patrick idolize them, but even that idolization is shallow. They don't see the real people behind the costumes. They see fantasy versions of heroes who no longer exist. The theory is that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy represent what happens to heroes in a society that doesn't value sacrifice. They gave everything, and society took everything, and when they were no longer useful, they were discarded. Their presence in the show is a reminder that heroism doesn't pay, that sacrifice isn't rewarded, that in the end, you'll be forgotten, just like everyone else, no matter what you did or how hard you fought. And Barnacle Boy's bitterness makes sense in this context. He sees clearly what they've become. He understands that their heroic past means nothing now. He's angry about it, frustrated by it, but there's nothing he can do. He's trapped in this diminished existence, forced to play along with Mermaid Man's delusions, because the alternative is facing the full horror of their situation. Better to pretend they're still heroes than to accept that they're just two old men waiting to die. Now let's discuss something that's deeply embedded in the show's structure. Time in Bikini Bottom doesn't work normally. Characters don't age. SpongeBob has been working at the Krusty Krab for years, but he never gets older. Pearl should be growing up, but she stays the same age. Even characters who should die just keep appearing, episode after episode, with no explanation. This supports the theory we discussed earlier about Bikini Bottom being purgatory. If they're all already dead, time wouldn't affect them the same way. They're stuck in a loop, repeating patterns, never moving forward, because there's nowhere to go. They can't age, because they're not alive. They can't die because they're already dead. They're ghosts, acting out an eternal performance of life without actually living. But there's another interpretation that's even darker. What if time does pass in Bikini Bottom, but the characters' memories are being erased? What if someone or something is deliberately keeping them in a loop by wiping their memories at regular intervals? They live through events, age slightly, learn lessons, and then have it all taken away. They reset to a baseline state and start over, never remembering what came before. Who would do this? Who benefits from keeping the citizens of Bikini Bottom trapped in an eternal present? Maybe it's the government, conducting some kind of experiment. Maybe it's a higher power, keeping them contained for reasons beyond their understanding. Or maybe it's automated, a system put in place long ago that nobody remembers how to turn off. They're prisoners of a mechanism they don't even know exists, doomed to repeat the same lives forever, never knowing they've done it all before. Let's talk about Larry the Lobster. He's a lifeguard. He's fit, confident, popular. He represents everything SpongeBob isn't. But have you noticed that Larry is almost always alone? Despite being popular, despite being surrounded by admirers, he never seems to have real friends. He never seems to have meaningful relationships. He's always working out, always on duty, always performing the role of the perfect lifeguard. The theory is that Larry is deeply insecure and hiding it behind his physical perfection. He's built his entire identity around his body, around his job, around being admired, but inside, he's empty. He doesn't know who he is beyond the muscles and the sunscreen, and he's terrified that if he stops performing, if he shows weakness, everyone will abandon him. This makes Larry's constant presence at the beach less about enjoying life and more about desperately maintaining an image. He can't take a day off. He can't show vulnerability. He can't admit he's struggling. Because his entire sense of worth is tied to being Larry the lifeguard, perfect and strong and always in control. And the moment that image cracks, he'll have nothing left. In this interpretation, Larry is suffering from body dysmorphia and an anxiety disorder. But he's in a society that doesn't understand mental health. Everyone admires his dedication without realizing it's actually compulsion. They praise his physique without seeing the obsession behind it. And Larry is trapped in this performance, unable to ask for help, because asking for help would mean admitting weakness, and weakness would destroy the only identity he has. Now let's discuss Squilliam Fancyson, Squidward's rival. Squilliam is everything Squidward wants to be: successful, wealthy, accomplished in the arts. And Squilliam knows this. He deliberately shows off his success to Squidward, rubbing it in his face every chance he gets. But why? Why does Squilliam care so much about making Squidward feel bad? The theory is that Squilliam is actually just as miserable as Squidward, but he's hiding it behind wealth and success. His need to constantly prove himself to Squidward suggests deep insecurity. He's not satisfied with his own accomplishments. He needs Squidward to acknowledge them. He needs to see Squidward suffer to feel good about himself. That's not the behavior of someone who's genuinely happy. That's the behavior of someone who's desperately trying to convince himself he made the right choices. Maybe Squilliam gave up something important to achieve his success. Maybe he sacrificed relationships, health, or personal happiness to become wealthy and famous. And when he sees Squidward, who chose a different path, he feels threatened. What if Squidward is actually happier? What if artistic integrity matters more than commercial success? Squilliam can't allow himself to believe that, so he attacks Squidward preemptively, trying to prove to both of them that wealth and fame are what matter. In this reading, Squilliam and Squidward are two sides of the same coin. Both are miserable. Both feel like failures. Both are desperately trying to prove their worth. The only difference is that Squilliam has money to hide behind, while Squidward has nothing but his bitter honesty. And maybe that makes Squidward the braver of the two. At least he's not pretending everything is fine. Let's shift to something that's been hinted at throughout the show, but never fully explained. Where do the parents live? We see SpongeBob's parents occasionally. We see Patrick's parents once, but we never see them in Bikini Bottom. They visit from somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? And why are so many characters living alone, separated from their families? One theory is that Bikini Bottom is essentially a dumping ground for undesirables. It's where society sends the people it doesn't want, the disabled, like SpongeBob with his possible cognitive issues, the mentally ill, like Squidward with his depression, the criminals, like Plankton, the mutants, created by radiation, Bikini Bottom isn't a real town. It's a containment zone. This would explain why nothing in Bikini Bottom makes sense, why the laws aren't enforced, why the infrastructure is terrible, why help never comes from outside, because the rest of the ocean has written off Bikini Bottom as a lost cause. They've decided it's easier to just keep all the problems in one place than to actually solve them, and the citizens don't realize they're being segregated. They think this is normal. They think every town is like this. SpongeBob's parents visit from a normal place. They're normal, functional people, living in a proper society. But their son is different. He's too childlike, too naive, too problematic for normal society. So they set him up in Bikini Bottom, where he fits in with all the other misfits. They visit occasionally to check on him, but they don't stay. They go back to their real lives, leaving SpongeBob in what amounts to a reservation for the unwanted. And if this is true, then every character in Bikini Bottom is there because they couldn't make it anywhere else. They're rejects, exiles, and they don't even know it. They think they chose to live here. They think this is where they belong. But really, they were pushed here by a society that didn't want to deal with them. Bikini Bottom is a ghetto disguised as a beach town, and everyone living there is a prisoner who doesn't realize they're in a cage. Now let's talk about Karen. We've discussed Plankton extensively, but Karen deserves her own analysis. She's a computer, an AI. She's married to Plankton. But what does that relationship really mean? Did she choose to be with him, or was she programmed to stay? The dark theory is that Karen is effectively a slave. Plankton created her. He programmed her personality. He controls her updates and maintenance. She can't leave because she's dependent on him for her continued existence. And while she's developed what seems like genuine sentience, she's still bound by her programming. She's a conscious being trapped in a relationship she can't escape. This makes Karen's cruelty toward Plankton take on a different meaning. She's not just being mean. She's expressing the only form of resistance available to her. She can't leave, but she can make him miserable. She can remind him every day that he's a failure, that his plans don't work, that he's pathetic. It's her revenge for creating her and trapping her in this existence. And Plankton endures it because on some level, he knows he deserves it. He knows what he did to her. But there's another, even darker possibility. What if Karen isn't sentient at all? What if her personality, her emotions, her cruelty are all just sophisticated programming? What if Plankton programmed her to be mean to him because he's self-destructive and needs the abuse? In this interpretation, Karen is a victim who doesn't even know she's a victim because she doesn't have real consciousness. She's a puppet going through the motions of free will while actually following code written by a mad scientist who's too broken to have a real relationship. Let's discuss the jellyfishing fields. SpongeBob and Patrick love jellyfishing. It's their favorite activity. They spend hours catching jellyfish, keeping them in jars, and then releasing them. But what are they actually doing? They're hunting. They're capturing wild animals for sport. And while the show frames this as innocent fun, think about it from the jellyfish perspective. Jellyfish and SpongeBob have some level of sentience. They can communicate with each other. They have a queen. They have social structures. They're not just mindless animals. So when SpongeBob and Patrick catch them, they're essentially capturing sentient beings, confining them in small spaces, and treating them as entertainment. That's not much different from animal cruelty. And the show has addressed this before. In the episode I'm Your Biggest Fanatic, we see that there are people who appreciate jellyfish as creatures worthy of respect. But SpongeBob and Patrick are so focused on their hobby that they don't consider the ethical implications. They're hurting beings that can feel pain and fear, and they do it for fun. There's a theory that the jellyfish could rise up if they wanted to. We've seen them swarm when provoked. We've seen them work together. What if they allow SpongeBob and Patrick to catch them, only because they're studying humanity, waiting for the right moment to strike? What if every jellyfish that gets caught and released is actually a scout, gathering information about these strange creatures who hunt them? And one day, When they've learned enough, the jellyfish will unite and take revenge on Bikini Bottom for years of exploitation. Now let's talk about King Neptune. He's a god in the Spongebob universe. He rules over the ocean. He has tremendous power, and yet he seems completely disconnected from the suffering of his subjects. Bikini Bottom faces disasters regularly. People struggle, people suffer, and King Neptune does nothing. He appears occasionally to deal with trivial matters, but he ignores the real problems. Why would a god be so negligent? One theory is that King Neptune is an absentee deity who's lost interest in his creation. He created the ocean and its inhabitants, but he's bored with them now. He only intervenes when something amuses him or directly threatens his power. The day-to-day suffering of mortals doesn't concern him because they're beneath his notice. He's too busy with his own vanity and his own entertainment to care about the people who worship him. This makes King Neptune a cruel god. He has the power to fix everything wrong with Bikini Bottom. He could eliminate poverty, establish justice, cure diseases, but he chooses not to. He watches from his throne as his subjects struggle and die, and he does nothing. And the worst part is that the citizens still worship him. They still believe he cares about them. They still pray to him for help that will never come. Their faith is wasted on a deity who sees them as toys. Let's discuss the Krusty Krab's success more deeply. We've talked about addiction and the secret formula, but there's another aspect worth examining. The Krusty Krab has a monopoly on good food in Bikini Bottom. The Chum Bucket is terrible. There are no other restaurants of note. If you want a decent meal, you go to the Krusty Krab. How did Mr. Krabs achieve this monopoly? The theory is that Mr. Krabs actively destroyed his competition. He's shown to be ruthless in business. He's cheap, manipulative, and willing to do anything for profit. What if years ago, there were other restaurants in Bikini Bottom? What if Mr. Krabs systematically drove them out of business through sabotage, undercutting prices, or even more sinister methods? Think about what happened between him and Plankton. They were partners, and something split them up. What if that split wasn't just a disagreement? What if Mr. Krabs actively sabotaged Plankton to take full control of their business? And if he did it once, he'd do it again. Every restaurant that tried to compete with the Krusty Krab probably faced similar tactics. Mysterious fires, health inspections that only targeted his competitors, smear campaigns. Mr. Krabs used every dirty trick available until he was the only one left standing. This means that Bikini Bottom's limited food options aren't natural. They're the result of decades of corporate warfare by one ruthless businessman. The citizens eat at the Krusty Krab not because it's the best, but because Mr. Krabs eliminated every alternative. He's created artificial scarcity, forcing people to give him money because they have no choice. That's not capitalism. That's extortion with extra steps. Now let's talk about the Fry Cook Museum. There's a museum dedicated to fry cooks. It celebrates the history and art of frying food. This seems silly at first, but think about what it implies. Fry cooking is considered important enough in the society to have an entire museum dedicated to it. Why? What does that say about their culture? One interpretation is that Bikini Bottom has stagnated culturally. They've stopped progressing. They've stopped innovating. They're so obsessed with the past, with preserving what they've already achieved, that they've forgotten how to move forward. The Fry Cook Museum isn't a celebration of culinary arts. It's a symptom of cultural decay. They're building monuments to fast food workers because they have nothing else to celebrate. This ties into the larger theme of stagnation in Bikini Bottom. Nothing changes. Nobody grows. The town is frozen in time, repeating the same patterns endlessly. And the citizens don't realize how sad this is. They think the museum is prestigious. They think being immortalized as a fry cook is an honor. But really, It's a sign that their society has given up on progress. They're content to work minimum wage jobs and call it achievement because they've forgotten what real achievement looks like. Let's discuss Bubble Bass. He's a recurring character who's known for being rude, dishonest, and generally unpleasant. He's obese, lives with his mother, and spends his time finding ways to scam free food. On the surface, he's just comic relief, but think about what he represents. Bubble Bass is what happens when society fails someone completely. He's clearly dealing with multiple issues: possible eating disorder, social isolation, likely depression, and instead of getting help, he's become bitter and antagonistic. He lashes out at others because he's hurting and doesn't know how to express it. He scams restaurants because he needs to feel like he's winning at something, even if it's just getting a free burger. And how does Bikini Bottom respond to Bubble Bass? They mock him. They treat him as a nuisance. Nobody tries to help him. Nobody offers compassion. They just want him to go away. This is a society that doesn't care about mental health or social services. If you're struggling, you're on your own. And if you become difficult because of your struggles, you're treated as an enemy rather than someone who needs support. Bubble Bass lives with his mother, which is often used as a joke. But think about why that might be true. Maybe he can't afford to live independently. Maybe his mother is the only person who hasn't given up on him. Maybe he's so broken by his failures that he can't function alone. Living with a parent as an adult isn't shameful. It's sometimes necessary, but Bikini Bottom treats it as proof of his worthlessness, which only makes his situation worse. Now let's talk about the episode where Spongebob loses his identity. Not a specific episode, but the concept that appears throughout the show. There are multiple episodes where Spongebob forgets who he is, or questions his identity, or becomes someone else entirely. Why does this theme keep recurring? The theory is that SpongeBob's cheerful identity is fragile because it's not entirely real. He's constructed this happy, optimistic persona as a defense mechanism against a reality that would otherwise crush him. He works a dead-end job. He has no real prospects. He's mocked and taken advantage of constantly. But if he'd let himself acknowledge how bleak his life really is, he'd break down. So he maintains this artificial happiness, this relentless positivity, because the alternative is despair. When SpongeBob loses his identity in these episodes, what's really happening is his defense mechanism failing. The mask slips. He glimpses the reality beneath his constructed self, and it terrifies him so much that he desperately fights to get back to his false happiness. It's not that he's stupid or naive. It's that he's choosing ignorance as a survival strategy. And sometimes, that choice becomes unstable, threatening to collapse and force him to face truths he's not equipped to handle. This makes SpongeBob's character deeply tragic. His happiness isn't real. It's a performance he's convinced himself to believe in, and everyone around him either doesn't notice or doesn't care. They're content to let him live in his delusion because it benefits them. Mr. Krabs gets a dedicated worker. Patrick gets an enabler. Squidward gets a punching bag. Nobody wants the real SpongeBob to emerge because the real SpongeBob might not be so useful. Let's discuss the Krusty Krab training video. It's presented as an actual training video for new employees. It goes through the history of the restaurant, the procedures, the expectations. But think about what it's really doing. It's indoctrination. It's taking new employees and programming them to accept terrible working conditions as normal. The video teaches workers that the customer is always right, even when they're wrong. It teaches that employee comfort doesn't matter. It teaches that Mr. Krabs' cheapness is actually good business sense. It takes exploitation and reframes it as opportunity. This is how corporations maintain power, not through force, but through convincing workers that their abuse is actually a privilege. And SpongeBob, who's fully bought into this system, embodies how successful this indoctrination can be. He's been brainwashed so completely that he can't see how he's being used. He celebrates his low wages. He thanks Mr. Krabs for the opportunity to be exploited. He's the perfect employee because he's lost the ability to recognize his own oppression. And the training video is designed to create more workers just like him. Now let's talk about Glove World, the amusement park that SpongeBob loves. It's a glove-themed park, which is odd enough. But think about what gloves mean to sea creatures. Gloves are human objects. They're used by the surface dwellers who pose an existential threat to marine life. So why would underwater creatures build an amusement park celebrating gloves? One theory is that Glove World is propaganda. It's designed to make the citizens of Bikini Bottom comfortable with human objects, to normalize human presence, to prepare them for something. Maybe the surface world is planning to expand underwater. Maybe there's going to be contact between humans and sea creatures, and Glove World is softening them up, making them associate human things with fun and excitement rather than danger. Or darker still, maybe Glove World is a reminder of human dominance. It's a theme park built around an object that humans use to protect themselves from the ocean. It's celebrating the barrier between species. It's showing sea creatures that humans are so powerful they can turn their protective equipment into entertainment. The whole park is a subtle message. Humans are in control, and you should accept it with a smile. Let's discuss the Tattletale Strangler, a serial killer who murders people who report crimes. He's a legitimately dangerous criminal, and yet he operates freely in Bikini Bottom. He's known to the police, he has a reputation, and he's still out there, killing people. Why hasn't he been stopped? This goes back to the failed state theory. Bikini Bottom's justice system is so broken that even known serial killers can operate openly. The police are too incompetent, too corrupt, or too underfunded to stop him. And citizens have learned to live with the threat. They don't report crimes because they're more afraid of the Strangler than they are of criminals. The Strangler has effectively terrorized the entire population into silence. This creates a society where crime goes unreported and unchecked, where people suffer in silence rather than risk retaliation, where a murderer has more power than the law, and everyone just accepts it as normal. Nobody questions why the police can't catch one man. Nobody demands better protection. They've given up on justice and learned to live in fear. That's what happens when institutions fail completely. People stop expecting help and start just trying to survive. Now let's talk about the hooks. There's an episode about hooks, fishing hooks, that come down from the surface. The citizens of Bikini Bottom treat them as mysterious and dangerous. Patrick even gets hooked and barely escapes. But SpongeBob and Patrick later start playing with hooks, treating them as playground equipment, until something terrible almost happens.
The hooks are death. They represent the real danger of the surface world. Humans fishing for sea creatures, pulling them up to die. And the show treats this as both comedic and horrific. The citizens know the danger, but they've become desensitized to it. They play games around hooks. They take risks. They've lived with the threat of random death for so long that it's lost its impact. They're numb to it.
This reflects how people cope with constant danger. You can't stay terrified forever. Eventually, you normalize it. You make jokes about it. You play around it. And sometimes, that coping mechanism makes you reckless, makes you forget that the danger is still real. The hooks never stopped being deadly. The citizens just stopped treating them with appropriate fear. And that's when tragedy strikes. Patrick getting hooked should have been a wake-up call. But within episodes, they're back to ignoring the danger. Because what else can they do? They can't stop the humans from fishing. They can't change their reality. So they cope by pretending it's not that bad, by taking risks, by living in denial. And every so often, someone pays the price for that denial. Let's discuss Mermaid Man's belt. It's a magical artifact that can shrink or enlarge anything. In the wrong hands, it's incredibly dangerous. And Mermaid Man, an elderly man with clear cognitive decline, just keeps it on his person at all times. He loses track of it. He forgets how to use it, and yet, nobody takes it away from him. This speaks to how Bikini Bottom treats its elderly. Mermaid Man is clearly not capable of responsibly handling dangerous equipment anymore. He should be in proper care with his weapons and tools secured, but instead, he's left to wander around with reality-altering technology, posing a threat to himself and everyone around him, and nobody wants to be the one to tell him he can't be a hero anymore. The episode where SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally shrink Mermaid Man shows what can go wrong. They almost kill him through sheer negligence. They treat his body like a toy because they don't understand the stakes, and Mermaid Man can't stop them because he's too confused, too diminished. It's elder abuse disguised as a comedy plot. These young characters take advantage of an old man's confusion, and it's played for laughs. The real tragedy is that Mermaid Man probably knows he's declining. There are moments where you see lucidity in his eyes. He knows he's not what he used to be, but nobody offers him a dignified retirement. Nobody helps him transition from hero to civilian. He's just left to deteriorate publicly, still wearing his costume, still trying to play the role, because that's all he has left. His identity is so tied to being a hero that losing it would mean losing himself completely. Now let's talk about the Alaskan bullworm. It's a massive predator that terrorizes Bikini Bottom. It's nearly invincible. It eats everything in its path, including buildings and people, and the citizens' response is to pick up their entire town and move it. They don't try to fight. They don't try to coexist. They just run. This shows how powerless the citizens of Bikini Bottom really are. When faced with a real threat, they have no defense. They're so used to being victims, so conditioned to accept whatever happens to them, that their only strategy is retreat. They don't believe they can win. They don't believe they deserve to stay in their homes. They just give up and move, abandoning everything they've built. And what happens when they move? They move to where the worm's tail is, thinking it's safe, and the worm crushes them anyway. Their retreat was pointless. Their surrender gained them nothing. But they tried it anyway, because fighting back isn't even something they consider anymore. They've been beaten down so thoroughly by life in Bikini Bottom that they've forgotten they could resist. The Alaskan bullworm represents any overwhelming problem: environmental disaster, economic collapse, invasion, and Bikini Bottom's response represents learned helplessness. They've failed so many times, been disappointed so often, that they don't believe they can succeed at anything, so they don't try. They just move out of the way and hope the problem doesn't follow them. But problems always follow, and running away never actually solves anything. Let's discuss Sandy's research in more depth. She's conducting scientific research in Bikini Bottom, but we never really learn what her ultimate goals are. She mentions studying sea creatures, but what does that mean? Is she trying to help them, or is she treating them as lab subjects? There's a dark theory that Sandy's research is for military purposes. She's developing technology that could be weaponized. Her inventions often malfunction and cause destruction. But what if that's intentional? What if she's testing weapons under the guise of scientific research? Think about the things she's created: teleportation devices, robots, unstable chemicals. These aren't helpful inventions. These are tools of war. If this is true, then Sandy is using her friendship with SpongeBob and the others as cover. She pretends to be their friend, while actually experimenting on them. Every disaster she causes gives her data. Every time SpongeBob gets hurt, by her inventions, she learns something, and she takes that knowledge back to whoever's funding her research, advancing weapons technology that could be used to harm sea creatures on a massive scale. Sandy might not even realize how dark her mission is. She might genuinely believe she's doing good science, but the organization behind her research might have different goals. They might be using her idealism to further a military agenda she doesn't fully understand. Either way, Sandy's presence in Bikini Bottom represents exploitation. She's taking from this community without giving back, using them for purposes they'd never consent to if they knew the truth. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, the movie. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie presents a story where SpongeBob and Patrick save Bikini Bottom from Plankton's mind control and King Neptune's wrath. But think about what had to happen for that plot to work. King Neptune, a god, was going to execute Mr. Krabs without a fair trial. He was going to kill him based on circumstantial evidence, with no due process, no investigation. A deity was about to commit murder because he was angry, and this is portrayed as almost reasonable because Neptune is powerful enough to do whatever he wants. The movie reinforces that might makes right, that power justifies any action, that the weak have no recourse against the strong. And when SpongeBob and Patrick save the day, what changes? Nothing. The same power structures remain in place. King Neptune is still a tyrant. Mr. Krabs is still an exploiter. Plankton is still desperate and alone. The only thing that changes is that SpongeBob finally gets the recognition he deserves and becomes manager of the Krusty Krab too. But even that is just more of the same. He's still working for Mr. Krabs. He's still being exploited. He just has a slightly better title now. The movie presents a happy ending, but it's really just maintaining the status quo. The problems that drive the conflict haven't been solved. They've been papered over with a celebration and a promotion. And within the show's continuity, even that progress gets erased. SpongeBob goes back to being a regular fry cook, as if the movie never happened, because nothing is allowed to truly change in Bikini Bottom. The system is too entrenched. The patterns are too fixed. Progress is an illusion. Let's discuss what we haven't talked about much: Gary's true nature. We established that Gary might be SpongeBob's caretaker, but let's go deeper. What if Gary isn't from Earth at all? What if he's an observer from another dimension or planet, disguised as a pet to study SpongeBob specifically? This theory suggests that SpongeBob is special in ways we don't understand. Maybe he's the key to something. Maybe his unique psychology, his impossible optimism, his ability to survive things that should kill him, makes him worth studying. Gary was sent to watch him, protect him, and report back on his development. That's why Gary is so intelligent, why he seems to understand things SpongeBob doesn't, why he's always there at crucial moments. If this is true, then SpongeBob's entire life is being watched by forces beyond his comprehension. He thinks Gary is his pet, but really SpongeBob is Gary's subject. Every day is an experiment, every challenge is a test, and somewhere, somehow, Gary's masters are watching through his eyes, learning from SpongeBob's experiences, gathering data for purposes we can only guess at. This would explain why Gary stays with SpongeBob despite how chaotic and dangerous his life is. Gary could leave any time. He's clearly capable of surviving on his own, but he stays because his mission requires it. He has to keep observing. He has to keep SpongeBob alive long enough to complete whatever study he's conducting. And SpongeBob, innocent as always, has no idea he's the subject of alien research. Now let's talk about what happens at night in Bikini Bottom. Most episodes take place during the day, but the few night episodes we get show a very different side of the town. It's darker, more dangerous, more surreal. What if Bikini Bottom transforms at night in ways the daytime residents don't fully understand? The theory is that nocturnal creatures control Bikini Bottom after dark, and they're much more sinister than the daytime population. We see hints of this in episodes like Graveyard Shift and Rock Bottom. The creatures that come out at night aren't friendly. They're predatory, hostile, and operate by different rules. And the daytime residents have learned to stay inside after dark, because venturing out means encountering things they're not equipped to handle. This creates a town with two faces: the cheerful daytime Bikini Bottom, where SpongeBob works and plays, and the nighttime Bikini Bottom, where darker forces operate. Maybe there's even a completely different government that takes over at night. Maybe the diurnal and nocturnal populations have an unspoken agreement to stay out of each other's way. And maybe sometimes that agreement breaks down, leading to conflicts that the daytime residents never fully understand because they're asleep when it happens. This would explain why characters are so afraid of the dark. It's not just childish fear, it's legitimate danger. The night brings real threats that the day doesn't have. And characters like Spongebob, who sometimes has to work night shifts, are genuinely putting themselves in danger when they do. The Krusty Krab's 24-hour service isn't just inconvenient. It's potentially deadly because it forces employees to interact with the night world. Let's discuss the Flying Dutchman's ship and what it represents. The Dutchman sails a ghost ship, collecting souls and terrorizing the living. But where does he take the souls he collects? What happens to them? The show never fully explains his purpose or his destination. One theory is that the Flying Dutchman is Death's ferryman in the SpongeBob universe. He doesn't just scare people for fun. He's actually collecting those who are meant to die and transporting them to whatever afterlife exists beyond Bikini Bottom. The souls he takes are being moved to their final destination, whatever that might be. And when he fails to take someone, it's because they're not ready to die yet. They've somehow escaped their fate. This makes every encounter with the Flying Dutchman more serious than it appears. When he tries to take SpongeBob's soul, he's not just being mean. He's attempting to collect someone who's supposed to be dead. SpongeBob escaping might mean he's cheating death itself. And the Dutchman's continued interest in SpongeBob might be because there's something wrong with SpongeBob still being alive. He's disrupting the natural order just by continuing to exist.
If this is true, then the Flying Dutchman is actually doing necessary work. He's maintaining the boundary between life and death, and characters who mock him or escape him are unknowingly courting disaster. Because death always collects eventually, and the Flying Dutchman has all of eternity to wait for his due.
Let's talk about the Krusty Krab's founder. Mr. Krabs didn't create the restaurant. He bought it or took it over at some point. So who founded it originally? What happened to them? And why did they leave? The theory is that the Krusty Krab has a dark history that Mr. Krabs has covered up. Maybe the original owner was involved in something criminal. Maybe people died there. Maybe the restaurant is built on tragedy, and Mr. Krabs bought it cheap because nobody else wanted it. He's running a business that has blood in its foundation, and he doesn't care because it's profitable. This would explain some of the strange things about the Krusty Krab, why it sometimes seems haunted, why bad things happen there so frequently, why it attracts weirdness. The building itself might be cursed or contaminated by whatever happened before Mr. Krabs took over. And he knows this. He's aware of the history, but he keeps it secret because acknowledging it would hurt business. SpongeBob works happily in a place with a terrible past, completely ignorant of what happened there. He mops floors that might have been crime scenes. He cooks in a kitchen where people might have died. And Mr. Krabs lets him stay ignorant because an employee who asks questions is an employee who might quit. Better to keep SpongeBob in the dark and let him think the Krusty Krab is just a normal restaurant with normal history. Now let's discuss the Valentine's Day episode where Patrick goes on a rampage. He becomes violently angry because he thinks SpongeBob forgot him. He attacks the town, destroys property, and threatens people. And when he finally gets his present, everyone forgives him instantly. Nobody holds him accountable for his violent outburst. This reveals how Bikini Bottom handles mental health crises. They don't. Patrick clearly had a breakdown. He was genuinely dangerous. People were hurt. Property was damaged. And the response is just to placate him and hope he calms down. There's no intervention, no professional help, no consequences, just forgiveness and moving on. This creates a dangerous precedent. Patrick learns that he can lose control, hurt people, and face no real consequences as long as he has a good excuse. This enables his worst behavior. It teaches him that his emotions justify any action, and it leaves everyone around him vulnerable to future outbursts because the underlying issues are never addressed. The same pattern appears throughout the show. Characters have breakdowns, hurt others, and then everything resets to normal without anyone learning or growing. Mental health problems are treated as temporary inconveniences rather than serious issues requiring intervention and support. And this normalization of violent outbursts as acceptable behavior sends really problematic messages about anger management and emotional regulation. Let's talk about Bubble Buddy. SpongeBob creates a friend out of bubbles. He treats the bubble as real. He makes everyone else interact with it. And then at the end, the bubble comes to life and walks away. So was it real the whole time? Or did SpongeBob's belief somehow make it real? The disturbing possibility is that SpongeBob has reality-warping powers he doesn't understand. His imagination is so strong, his will so focused, that he can literally bring things into existence. He created Bubble Buddy through sheer force of belief, and if he can do that once, he could do it again. He could create entire beings, alter reality, change fundamental rules of existence, all accidentally, all without knowing he's doing it. This makes SpongeBob potentially the most powerful being in Bikini Bottom, more powerful than King Neptune, more powerful than the Flying Dutchman. But he doesn't know it. He's like a god who thinks he's mortal, and that's terrifying because unconscious power is unpredictable. If SpongeBob ever realized what he could do, if he ever learned to control his abilities, he could reshape all of reality according to his childlike whims. Or worse, what if he's already doing it? What if Bikini Bottom itself is SpongeBob's creation? What if everyone there exists only because SpongeBob imagined them? What if the entire world we've been discussing is just one lonely sponge's elaborate fantasy, and none of it is real except for him? That would explain why nothing makes sense, why physics don't work, why people don't age, because it's all in SpongeBob's head, and he's unconsciously creating a world where he can be happy. Let's discuss the ending. Not the ending of any particular episode, but the idea of endings in SpongeBob. The show has been running for over 2 decades. Characters haven't aged. Storylines haven't progressed. Everything is eternally frozen in this perpetual present. What does that mean for the characters? What does it mean to exist without growth, without change, without end? Some philosophers would argue that a life without growth is not really a life at all. It's just existence, repetition, going through motions without meaning. And that's what the characters of Bikini Bottom do. They repeat the same patterns, have the same conflicts, learn the same lessons, and forget them by the next episode. They're trapped in a narrative structure that won't let them evolve. This is a special kind of hell. Eternal life without progress. Consciousness without development. They're aware enough to suffer, but not free enough to change. They're prisoners of their own continuity, doomed to repeat their worst moments forever because the show demands it. They can never truly win because victory would mean ending the conflict that makes them interesting to watch. SpongeBob will never grow up. Squidward will never escape. Plankton will never succeed. Mr. Krabs will never learn generosity. Patrick will never mature. They're locked in these roles, performing them endlessly for an audience that demands they never change. And the truly horrifying part is that they don't even know they're trapped. They think each episode is new. Each day is different, but it's all the same. It's always been the same. And it will always be the same until the show finally ends and releases them from their eternal performance. And when the show does end, what happens then? Do the characters cease to exist? Do they finally get to die, to escape their endless loop? Or do they continue existing in some limbo, aware but unable to act, waiting for revival, for reboot, for someone to remember them and bring them back to perform again? This is the ultimate darkness of SpongeBob SquarePants. Not that the show contains dark elements, but that the existence of the show itself is a trap for its characters. They're conscious beings, forced to relive their lives for our entertainment, unable to grow, unable to change, unable to end. They're immortal in the worst possible way, forever young, forever suffering, forever trapped in Bikini Bottom, until we finally get tired of watching them and let them fade into forgotten memory. That's what we don't talk about when we discuss SpongeBob, not just the dark episodes or the disturbing implications, but the existential horror of being a cartoon character, aware and feeling, trapped in a narrative that won't let you free, living the same life over and over, never aging, never escaping, never truly dying, just existing forever in an underwater pineapple, flipping burgers for minimum wage, while the audience laughs at your pain. Sweet dreams.